Hi, my name is Lydia and I work for Carbon Fact. I'm looking forward to giving you a little crash course in the upcoming textile sustainability regulations today. A few words about Carbon Fact before we get started. Carbon Fact is the only carbon management platform that is tailored to the needs of the fashion industry. We work globally with more than 150 brands who use Carbon Fact to run life cycle assessments for all of their products, perform their yearly carbon accounting, simulate what if scenarios and build transition plans, and in turn achieve compliance with some of these new regulations, such as the CSRD. So let's get started. When I first dived into the topic, I noticed that it helps to first understand how do all these new regulations belong together. You have likely heard of the European Green Deal. It aims to make Europe the first climate neutral continent by 2050. Within the Green Deal, there is the Circular Economy Action Plan, which defines the concrete actions to achieve that goal. Here, the EU has developed a specific strategy for the textile sector, which serves as the foundation for all these directives and regulations that are continuously being introduced. On the slide, you see an overview of the main regulations that have either already been approved or are still in the works. All of them amend or revise existing regulations. Today, I will only focus on the ones that are quite advanced already in the process and will have an impact on you soon. And therefore, you should start taking action. Let's start with the CSRD, or the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. This directive has been approved and is currently being implemented by the membership states. The goal is to standardize ESG reporting within the EU, and the directive will require textile companies to report on a yearly basis on environmental and social matters. You will need to set climate targets and build a concrete transition plan on how to get there, as well as report your progress year over year. The sustainability report needs to be part of the official management report and it has to be audited. Ultimately, every listed company selling into the EU will need to comply, but there is a phased in approach. The first group of textile companies is already preparing for their first report in 2025 over the 2024 financial year. If you're a listed SME, you will need to report from 2027 over 2026. But there will be some possibilities to opt out of some of the requirements for 2 years. Let's have a closer look at what and how you need to report. The CSRD introduces a new reporting framework called the European Sustainability Reporting Standard, or the ESRS. It is comprised of in total 12 standards, which we can group into 4 categories. Cross-cutting standards that require general and sector-specific disclosures, environmental, social, and governance standards. The CSRD also introduced a so-called double materiality assessment, which requires you to assess what data points are actually relevant to your business. So, for example, you have to look at it from 2 sides. If we take climate as an example, what is the climate's potential impact on you financially? And what is your company's impact on the climate? If after this assessment a certain standard is not relevant to you, you will not be required to report on it. For textile companies, a lot of the topics in the standards, such as climate, labor rights, and so on, will be definitely material, and it will require you to gather a vast amount of data points. Just zooming in a bit on climate reporting, the ESRS E1 will require you to report your Scope 3 emissions in detail. And already this will be a big challenge for most of the textile brands who mostly don't have much insights into their supply chain. So even if you don't have to report yet, you should start getting the right tools together so you're able to gather all the data needed. The starting point for the CSRD is always First, to assess the materiality, and then perform a gaps analysis on what data points you already measure and what not. The next regulation I'd love to talk about is the Eco Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, or the ESPR. This one is quite advanced already, and its final approval is expected in Q1 2024. It's a regulation and will therefore become EU law directly. The goal is to reduce the environmental impact of the products throughout the entire life cycle. This regulation sets certain eco design requirements, including the durability, repairability, recyclability, and environmental footprint of textiles. It also involves creating a digital product passport for each product and a ban of the destruction of unsold footwear and textiles. Some examples of the requirements for fashion brands could include setting minimum requirements for the quantity of recycled material in a garment, or requirements for the usage of easily recyclable fabrics, allowing textile to textile recyclings. The ESPR is a market entry regulation, so every brand, including SMEs that sell into the European market, will need to comply. SMEs can expect financial help, for example, to perform life cycle assessments that are needed to comply. It is expected that the ESPR proposal will be adopted by the European Parliament still this month, in March 2024, and then it will enter into force by the end of June 2024. The next step will be the development of tailored requirements for the textile sector. This is already ongoing and is expected to be published by the end of 2025. Once it is published, brands will have 18 months to prepare, which means you need to be ready to comply by 2027. Textile brands can best prepare now already by adopting a proactive approach to eco-design. For example, you will need to perform life cycle assessment for your complete catalog and simulate the environmental performance before your products are made. Let's have a closer look at the digital product passport, the DPP, which is part of the ESPR. It is a digital record of a product's key characteristic throughout the entire life cycle. Potentially, there are 16 categories of information that could be contained in the DPP. However, they're not decided yet. For the DPP, it will be a phased-in approach, with a minimal and simplified version for textiles starting from 2027, which would contain data such as the information of the environmental impact, the presence of microfiber, and information on the traceability of the supply chain for at least the location of the main processes. So, as you can see already in that first version, you will need to provide a lot of information. So, you should start gathering data about your supply chain and products as soon as possible. Let's continue with the Green Claims Directive. It has just made news because the proposal was adopted at the beginning of this week. It complements the existing Unfair Commercial Practices Directive, that you might know, and introduces more specific rules about environmental claims. For example, you need to verify any claims made by an independent verifier. The directive provides detailed guidance on how to communicate and substantiate any of these claims, and it introduces new rules on environmental labeling. There will be hefty fines of at least 4% of annual turnover in case of non-compliance, which is quite material if you consider that right now every second claim made is not compliant with this directive. All companies will need to comply except micro enterprises, but SMEs have an extra year and can expect financial help. When it comes to proof, if you want to make any claims, you need to rely on scientific evidence and perform life cycle assessments to source and back the data. As for the timeline, This can be expected in 2027 or 2028. The proposal, as mentioned, was adopted this week, and now the dialogue phase starts with the new parliament after the European elections in June 2024, which could potentially delay things. Until then, the UCPD is the only European law that addresses environmental claims about the impact of a product or brand. So, the best way really to prepare for the Green Claims Directive is to now comply with the UCPD already. Let's continue on the empowering consumer for the Green Transition Directive. This directive really goes hand in hand with the Green Claims Directive and the Eco Design Directive. It introduces a right for information on the repairability and durability of the products, and it expands the blacklist of claims that are not allowed to be used. For example, will not be allowed to make any generic claims such as eco-friendly or green, and it is also not possible anymore to make environmental claims about the entire product when it actually only concerns a specific part. For example, instead of saying this is made with recycled material and giving the impression that the entire product is made of recycled materials, when in fact only the packaging or a small percentage of the fabric is made from recycled material. It applies to the same companies than the Green Claims Directive that we have just looked at, and the proposal was also adopted this month. And now it will be discussed by the Council and the European Parliament. And it can be expected to be applicable to you from 2027 and 2028. Let's continue with the CSDDD, or the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. It has also been in the news in the recent weeks as it is in the very final stage to be approved. As per the directive, fashion and textile brands will need to develop due diligence policies and identify and stop any negative human and environmental impacts of their activities. You also have to set carbon reduction targets and make sure your overall strategy is aligned with the Paris Agreement. This directive will only apply to very large companies with more than 1,000 employees and 450 million in revenue. And there will be a phased in approach with the first group of companies starting to report and build these policies in 2027. Thank you all for listening. If you want to deep dive on some of the regulations mentioned today, just visit our blog and Textile Regulations Hub, where we provide much more detailed information of any of these regulations and what it means for fashion, footwear, textile brands. Just go to carbonfact.com/fashion rules. Thank you.